Welcome to My Life, Tanya Applied, with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
A good tavach, a good week. We continue our journey in the life-changing Sefer Tanya. This program is made possible by Rena Lights LLC and is in honor and memory of Rabbi Yosef Halevi Weinberg Olav Hashalom, Rabbi Moshe Pinchas HaKohen Katz Olav Hashalom, and Rabbi Yael HaKohen Khan Olav Hashalom. It's also in schus and merit of Rav Zevi Cheskel HaKohen and Risha Katz La'irich Yomim B'Shanim Tevis for many long, healthy years. As above all, also in schus of the men fighting on the front lines to protect all the innocent men, women, and children in Eretz Yisrael. That Hashem should protect them all and protect Eden everywhere. We began Perek Yud Zayin, the 17th chapter of Tanya. When the Alter Rebbe comes back to the pasuk that he brought on the cover page, that the whole Sefer Tanya is miyusad on the pasuk Kikorav Elecha Adover Me'ed B'Ficha B'Lvavcha L'Aseh Levayed Heitiv, to explain well how it's Korav Me'ed B'Derech Harucha K'tzorav Be'ezras Hashem Yisbarach. So now, Korav Me'ed, as we discussed, is a critical piece. The Alter Rebbe uses it on the Shabbat of Tanya. So it's like the whole foundation of Tanya. Because its message is that Yiddishkeit, Torah Mitzvahs, Hadover, which generally means all Torah Mitzvahs. It has another taich, Tshuva, but both are Korav Me'ed, very relevant, accessible, which is the whole point of Tanya, to teach us how having a relationship with Hashem is not distant, is not Me'ever L'Yam, Le'er Chayka, not Me'ever L'Yam across any wide sea, and Le'er B'Shamayim, not in heaven. It's accessible, relates to us. So how does he explain that? Because the Beinani is Midas Kol Adam, V'Acharei Kol Adam Yimshach. Once we've established that the Midas Beinani is the Midas Kol Adam, it is essentially the personality of every person, and every person longs for it and is capable of longing for it. That means every person, Midas Kol Adam. A tzaddik is not every person, because you have to have a special neshama. A Rasha is without Aveda, we have a Nefesh Elikis, Nefesh Abamis. But the ability to become a Beinani, as we learned in chapter 12 and on, is something that each of us can access. So it's Korav Elecha Dover Me'ed, be a Beinani. So it's the Beinani that's the Korav Elecha Dover Me'ed. And we learned that a Beinani has Moich Shal Tal Lev, and all the other elements, the power of davening that helps, the Ava Mesuteres that's there, the inherent love that he has, the Imid Liyamine that Hashem stands to him on the right side. So it's 2 against 1. Zev is a Sheftan, you have the Nefesh L'Kis, Nefesh Abamis. So Beinani has a Nefesh Abamis. That tells us it's shaykh to everyone. Because it's not talking about someone who eliminated the animal soul. So everybody can be a Beinani. Even a person with the Nefesh Abamis, what it requires is self-mastery and self-control to not allow the emotions, the impulses of the animal soul to impact your thought, speech, and action. And how we continue to explain in chapters 12 and 13 and 14, 15 and 16, the different levels of a Beinani. And finally in chapter 16, he made it clear that even the Moich Shal Ta'alev does not necessarily mean that you have full-blown passionate emotions. Because then again it would be something that's not Korav Elecha Dover Me'ed for every person. Elecha. And when the Torah says Elecha, it means every individual. So how did Alter Rebbe explain that? Because even me, the second Klal Gadol in chapter 16, after the first Klal Gadol, that a Beinani is not just someone who's self-mastery, but also works on his emotions to have that control over his animal soul, as much as possible. But then the second Klal Gadol comes to saying, even if he's unable to awaken, to stimulate a full-blown, fiery passion, what he called Ava, Bizgalus Libe, Kiddush B'Yesh, and all the Lashonos expressions he used, nevertheless, he has the ability to control his mind. His mind should focus on it. And talumes libe, to get an emotion, and at least an emotion that appreciates God and feels it's worthy, it's worthy to connect to God. So even though he does not feel the full-blown passion, but he feels enough to feel that it's worthy. And that tfuna, as he called it, the tfuna, which is the midas, bina, as it relates to the midas, to emotions, is the cause for him to do Torah mitzvahs. In other words, he's not doing it by rote, or by routine, or by hergel, by teva, by his nature, first nature, or hergel nasa teva, by his second nature. He's putting avodah. He didn't reach that level, as he explained in the first Haggadah in chapter 16, which is that because he's not on that level, he's on the level of ibur. And furthermore, the Eibishter helps him, machshava teva, HaKadosh Baruch Hu mitzaref l'maisa, helps fill in the lack and compensate for that lack of full passion to make sure it becomes like wings that elevate his Torah mitzvahs, elevate his thought, speech, and action. So we see here, he's not reached the highest level. And yet, he's still not called a Beinoni. So all that sets the stage now to come to chapter 17 and say, now we could say, Korev elecha dover me'ed. But before he gets to the explanation, he emphasizes the questions, because l'cheira beficha, to speak, to learn Torah with your mouth and to speak the right things, that's something that everybody can access. That's korev elecha dover me'ed. L'seisei also, you can expect actions. But we said earlier, that's not just actions, we also want belevavcha. Ubelvavcha l'seisei. So l'cheira has the Alter Rebbe, l'cheira hu belevavcha neged achus shelanu. Belvavcha it goes counter to our nature, because not everybody can necessarily arouse an emotion. V'ateidah nitzchis, as we learned, and the Torah that says Korev elecha dover me'ed is not just talking about the Der HaMidbar, the Der Deya, where there you could say that they have ability to reach the heart. But the rest of us not. Then you don't have the question. Korev elecha means elecha nitzchi to every yid, all generations. So that only awakens that only strengthens the question. She'ein korev me'ed adov lahapich libi metayves elam azel avos Hashem be'emes. For a regular person, meaning we're not talking about a tzaddik. It's not korev me'ed. It's not an easy or within reach, you can say, accessible or relevant to him. The ability to transform and turn away his heart from the desire to turn away the desires of his heart, desires of this world in his heart, to genuine love of God. That's not something that seems to be korev elecha dover me'ed. Again, beficha l'seisei fine, but belevavcha is the lashon also. So you already see where it's going, the answer. Because as we'll discuss in a moment. But he continues to make the case for the question. Like the Gemara says, about a lower level than Ava. Even Yireh belev, even the reverence in the heart is not a milsa zutra, it's not a small thing. The kol shkein Ava. And how much more so Ava, like we discussed, and just summing up, because Yireh is relatively easier to avoid something, to feel reverence, doesn't require an awakening of a passionate love, or a love in general. So if Yireh is not a small matter, Ava is for sure not a davar kal. It's not an easy thing. And especially as he says, because the loving God means that you have to go away from and turn away from the desires of this world. Yireh, you could say, you avoid it because you have an element of reverence, of respect, of fear, the different levels of Yireh. But Ava requires a type of, a birthing of being drawn to something. That's harder than just avoiding it through Yireh. So therefore Ava is even harder. and still we say Korav Elecha Adav Meid B'Levavcha. And Levavcha means here both, obviously, Yira and Ave. So therefore the question remains, how could you say Korav Elecha Adav Meid B'Gei to Levavcha? And then he adds even more, furthermore. V'gam Omru Rabbeinu Zal. Razal also say, and I should add, when we say Oti Yirim Milsa Zutrasi, that we're talking about even the generation of Moshe. All generations, but even the generation of Moshe. So even if you want to say that it's Korav Elecha, the generation of Moshe, we say the Yid is not easy, even in the time of Moshe, and for sure Ava. Then he adds, Razal say, Tzadikim dafka libim b'reshusam. It's dafka tzadikim whose heart is in their control. They're in control of their hearts, as the Medrash says in Bereshis Rabbah 34:10, Lamed Daled Yud. So what do we see from this? So you're saying Korav Elecha Adav Meid Elecha to everyone, but dafka tzadikim have that control over their heart. So that just intensifies the question, how do you say Korav Elecha? Every person on Levavcha, on the heart. When Libam is Bereshusam by the tzaddik. We're later going to learn the opposite of that is that the Shoyim were the opposite. By Rosha it says the opposite expression. Shar Shoyim hem bereshus libam. That but Rosha they are in control of their heart controls them. But we're not getting there yet because we're still talking about the Beinani. Beinani is not a tzaddik. Dafka tzaddik libam bereshus, and that's what the Alter Rebbe emphasized. The tzaddikim dafka, not Beinanim. And yet we still say Korav Elecha Adav Meid by B'Levavcha. So we have to say that all of us, every person has access and the ability, it's reachable for him, to have Korav Elecha also in his heart. So how do you explain that? So now the Alter Rebbe is going to answer. Elo. And here's the explanation. Rather, the way we have to read the pasuk is like this: the lasese reitz leimer ha'ava ha'mevia lidei asiyas hamitzvah bolvad. Remember, the lashon here is beficha ubilvavcha lasese. Seemingly, it should say beficha ubilvavcha ulasese avav. 3 things. But the expression is ubilvavcha lasese. So in other words, the levavcha is the part of the heart that brings you to action. So this brings us back to chapter 16, that there's 2 ways that emotion can affect you. You can have a full-blown emotion after a contemplation, and you feel fiery passion. You love something, you pasha love it. Think of things that you love, even lahavdil, something in Gashmis. And the love is literally driving you to long for it and to access it. That's it, what he called Ava Bizgalus Libe. But let's say your mind and your heart appreciate that it's a good thing, but you just do not have that fiery passion. That still does not mean there's no emotion. The emotion is enough for you to act on it because you know it's worthy. So you could act on it because your mamish feel that full consumed with that love for it, or as we learned, betalum eslibe, ba'ava musateres b'meichem, betalum eslibe, what he called tfuna. So it's an emotion, you can say an emotion for an emotion. You feel the importance of feeling it, but you don't feel it with the full passion that drives you. But it's enough to get you to act on it because it's worthy. You see the value in it. And we see this in many situations in our lives. the situation you don't even appreciate something. There's no avodah. A person either is drawn to something or not drawn. It doesn't relate to me. But here we're talking about you have contemplated on it. And in some way it's affected you also emotionally. So there are things that literally the emotion alone is enough to get you to do it. But there are other things you appreciate. So you show up because you know it's valuable. You just say, I don't feel it through and through, but I know in my mind and I sense the value of this. So that is calling Bulvovcha Lasese. Ha'ava mevil l'de'asiyas ha'mitzvah bulvad. It's a lower level of love, just what is needed to bring about the practical observance of the mitzvahs. Because again, we're not talking about someone that is naturally drawn to mitzvahs by their nature, like he spoke about in chapter 15, or by second nature, due to routine and training yourself. That he called lo yavode. That's not serving. We're talking here there is a service. However, you weren't able to reach that level of passionate love. But it's enough. But this avodah has brought you to do the mitzvah, like he said in chapter 16. Without this tefuna, you wouldn't have done it. Again, we're not talking about the automatic pilot. We're not talking about someone doing it mechanically or robotically. It wouldn't have done it. So you see that the love was strong enough at least to act on it. To just give a very, balabatish, practical example. In a relationship, in marriage, or relationship with your children, there are times you mamish feel inside you a very strong desire to do something for the one you love. And it doesn't take any extra, it takes effort that you got into that place. But you feel it, and that's that. There are times you may not completely feel, you could say, I'm not fully in that mood, or I don't feel, and I'm not that stimulated to that extent. But you know in your heart and in your mind that this is important to do. To the point that it gets you to do it. If someone will ask you, do you feel it with a full passion? You say, I don't feel it, but I know that it's valuable, that it's precious, that it's important. So that is calling, that's also Bilvavcha. It's a Bilvavcha that relates to Asiyah, the Tfuna, that relates to the Midas, to bring you at least to the action. Now, when you have that Kodesh Baruch Hu Mitzarfa L'Maisa, we learned, that is like the gift that he gives, that compensates and adds even more, as if you felt it completely. But that's not that point. We learned already in chapter 16. It doesn't have to be repeated here. Because you have the Levavcha. It's just the Machshava Tev Mitzarfa adds more to it than it's Aliyah Tebriya, as we learned at the end of chapter 16. But bottom line is, there is a Levavcha here. But it's and what is that level? He says very clearly, Shehiru usa deliba shebetalumas lev. This lower level of love, minimal love you can call it, is the desire of the heart of usa deliba. It's an expression in Zohar. The desire of the heart, which is in the hidden places in the heart. Like we learned, talumas libe. It's not bizgalus libe, that's the higher level. That would be b'levavcha, beyond just lasese. In other words, not just to bring you to action. That's a full-blown emotion. But since we're talking korev elecha for everyone is capable of this, as we're going to learn in a moment. Even if it is not tangible, palpable in the person's heart like a flaming fire, which is the higher level of Bulavavcha. The dove is zeh korev ma'ed. And this level is korev ma'ed. This is very much within reach, accessible, relevant to every person, and easily accessible, nakal ma'id, and easily, karev ma'id v'nakal, and easy, L'kol Adam, Elecha, L'kol Adam, for every person. Asher yesh le moyach b'kadeh. Every person who has a moyach b'kadeh, a brain in his head, which is an expression from the Gemara in Yevomis, Tes Aleph, 9a. Now, why does it say a brain in his head? Because you do need that. Because at the end of the day, you do need the focus. Even if it's not creating a fiery passion, you do understand and appreciate with your mind, and to extent with your heart. V'talumas libe, ki moiche b'reshusei, says the Alter Rebbe. Because what is in your brain is b'reshusei. What he said before, libam b'reshusei, but tzaddikim, he said lev. Their heart is in there. They have the power over. They control their hearts. The Beinani controls his moyach. Moyach shalit ala lev. That's not liba b'reshusei. It's a lower level. But moyach he does have, and the moyach can dominate and control his heart. V'yochel is beinan boy b'chol k'chol asher yachpetz. And with his mind, he can think about whatever he wants. As we learned earlier, nothing stops you. With your mind, a mind can go to places that your emotions may not go. Emotions, you could say, I don't feel it. But your mind can contemplate and imagine things that are far beyond where your emotions are. So therefore, since he could do that anytime he wants, and every person has a mind, so literally the Alter Rebbe is making a case, all the ingredients are there. Because therefore, because she is beinah by begdula sein sof. When he contemplates about the greatness of Ein Sof, of the infinite, Baruch Hu, Ein Sof Baruch Hu, Memela Yelid, that will Memela inevitably, not with any, it inevitably generates, give birth to, B'moiche al koponim ha'ava Hashem. At least in your mind, a love for God. L'dofke by b'kiyam mitzvesav v'teiraseh. To attach himself to Hashem, to Him, through the practical observance of mitzvahs and the study of Torah, of his Torah. So you see here, he's saying at least in the mind. We know it also affects the heart, talumas libe. But why is he focusing on the mind? Because he wants to make it so accessible. Because in the mind, for sure, you can appreciate it. How much you feel it in your heart, that's already a question. But it affects your heart as well. He said, "Re'usad libe b'talumas libe." So in other words, your mind can appreciate something even though you may not completely feel it. And that's b'reshus of every person. So that answers the question, what he said before, how could you say bilvavcha, which is neged achus shalanu, she'ein karav meid adavar. It's not karav meid for a person to redirect his heart toward the physical things, toward the material world, to love God in truth, because the answer is, the Pasuk is saying what's karav meid is that your ability to use your mind, and at least as much emotion as you can generate, that you realize the importance to bring it to action. Like he said, "Mevil de'asiyas hamitzvos." This ava Hashem. So there is a levavcha, there is an ava. Al koponim b'meyach. But it's very clear that he also means to some extent in the lev as well. But he uses the word ava Hashem. Remember, tfuna we learned was ben of bas. So tfuna is already has an emotional side. You can call it the midas shebeseichel, the emotions in the mind. But we learned also the talum es libe. Okay, so a few more lines just to drive the point home. Says the Alter Rebbe now like this. V'zeh kol ha'odam. And this indeed is the entire purpose of a man, of a human being. Why is Alter Rebbe saying that? Because this indeed, what's the ikar is, that the Ava should bring him to action. And here it's important to qualify. On one hand, he said the first Klal Gadol in chapter 16 is not just action-based, behavioral, thought, speech, and action, but you should also control your animal soul. In the second Klal Gadol, he said, even if you don't have the full passionate of love, at least it's a passionate love that translates into action. So we want both. The primary things on my secret obviously is action. But we also want you should do everything possible, because like he spoke earlier in chapters, the chapters in Tanya, that to really do mitzvahs properly, it shouldn't be done robotically. It has to be done with the Makaimon Be'emes, who fulfills mitzvahs properly, is someone that does it with love. Imagine, I mentioned before the example in relationships, that you're only an automatic pilot. There's never a feeling. No, you want the feeling as much as possible. But the bottom line is it's Zeh Kol Ha'odam is the focus del Bilvavcha to the last seisei. In other words, if you only have Bilvavcha, as even if it's a fiery passion, it doesn't bring last seisei, you're not fulfilling the purpose. On the other hand, you want the last seisei not to come robotically, you want it to come from the heart and from the mind as much as possible. Ki hayem last seisem ksiv, shayem hu elam ha'maisa dafke. It says that today the work is asesam, is the world of asiyah. Ulamacher chulu, commission is bar b'mokem acher. Lamacher lekabel schoram. So in other words, we want the main thing is the action, but so lebelvavcha toward la seisei. And then v'ameich shalid b'tivei v'teldose al chol asmoli shabelev. And we learned earlier that the moyach controls inherently and naturally. The brain rules over the left side of the heart, like we learned in chapter 9 from Zohar. Va'al piv va'al kol evorim shem klei ha'maisa. It controls the heart, va'al piv, and over his mouth and over all the limbs and instruments of action. So it affects everything. And here you see the word piv, levavcha, and lasese, all coming together, which we will discuss more in the next shir. So we'll stop here. Everyone have a good tavach, a good week. And it should be Nasati Shalom Ba'aretz.
This has been My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit chasidusapplied.com for archived classes and more resources.